Hello. Now, those of you in the audience today who here had a rough childhood, out of those of you that answer that question, there's probably a fair amount of you who did something to cope with it. I myself had played video games to cope with my own rough childhood. For my presentation today, I'll be telling you the different ways that video games can be beneficial in both your everyday life and in the lives of others. This information will be from my own experience, studies of practical benefits, and studies of effects of on the mind of video games. First off, with my own self-experience, during my childhood, I had to come to terms and grapple with having an abusive stepfather who would verbally abuse me and put me down. And I would also have to deal with my own bullies at school when I wasn't at home. And what I did was, after I'd come home and do my homework, if I didn't have anything else to do, I would get in my games and use it as a way to decompress and relieve stress and just calm down mentally. And while doing that, when I would go to school, also, I would meet people who were in similar circumstances as myself and would cope similarly. And I'm still meeting people today. And many of them have become very good friends. Now, besides of accounts of myself and friends, there are also more professional settings that video games are beneficial and used in, such as referred to in the Brain Boosting Benefits of Gaming by Ari Kaplan. It's an ebook. There is a school in New York City called Quest to Learn, where students will learn by either playing or designing video games to learn different subjects. For example, if they're learning geometry, a teacher could say, hey, I want you to design a room in the video game. However, I also want you to tell me the real-world dimensions of what that video game would be. And it would allow them to be more engaged in their activities and subjects and feel, possibly, it might feel more relatable because they may also play video games themselves. Now, there are also more career-oriented settings that video games are used for. For instance, the military personnel would play a game called Tactical Iraq, which was created in 2005, that was used to help people be able to learn the customs, language, or how to act wherever they were going to be sent. For example, for people who are going to Afghanistan, they would be put in a scenario where they would have to enter a cafe and communicate with locals. Now, the game teaching them the customs and language would help, but the game would also help them learn what would be the appropriate way to approach. For example, the game would not let them approach with their weapons drawn or fully decked out in gear, because that would be treating them not quite as people when they approached, and taught them otherwise, which helped them there. And then also in the field of surgical work, the surgeons, there was a game created in 2001 called Super Monkey Ball, which would help surgeons with their hand-eye coordination and help them practice for that. There are also studies that have proven that people who play video games regularly will increase cognitive ability. For example, as referred to in the Brain Boosting Power of Video Games, an academic journal by Daphne Bellier and Sean C. Green, there are brain scans that showed that people who played action video games would have more activity in certain parts of the brain, such as the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that helps sustain attention, the parietal cortex, which is focused among different targets, and the cingulate cortex, which is a locus for monitoring one's behavior. Now, not only can video games help in external aspects of our lives, they can also help us internally. For example, there are video games that can help convey stories, talk about feelings that are hard to talk about, or make people contemplate more about themselves. For example, with conveying stories and feelings, there are two games that immediately come to mind for me. The two games are one, which is called That Dragon Cancer, which was created in 2016 by two parents who had to deal with the struggle and pain of having to raise their child who was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And you would go through the process of having to feel their pain and seeing what it was like. And then the next game that I will refer to is called Depression Quest, where it's sort of like a simulation where you would have to play the game and see what it would be like to be a person with depression. And you would have to make decisions such as, will you seek therapy? Will you communicate with other people to try to become more open socially? Will you try to help yourself physically and improve your own health? And things like that. Both games were known for being very effective with the people who played them, and just, giving them new perspectives to certain things. And not only that, there are also some instances of video games being studied showing that they can make people think about their own humanity and change their social behaviors, such as within the academic journal Effects of Playing Video Games on Perceptions of One's Humanity by Grit Mayer. Through a study, it was concluded that those who played social video games had an increased sense of positive humanity. And another academic journal called Gaming for Good, Video Games and Enhancing More Pro-Social Behavior by Holly Ann Passmore and Mark D. Holder, as a quote, "It is a gross miscalculation to believe that most people who play video games are antisocial individuals, when in fact most people who play video games are either around other people in the exact same room they're playing with, such as family member friends, or people over the internet in games such as MMORPGs. So they would be able to be more social and be able to interact more and not be lonely." Now, within this speech, as a summary, I have discussed the multiple benefits a person can reap through video games, such as through my own experiences, the results of studies, and how video games can touch on a personal level. Now, earlier, out of those of you who said yes to having a rough childhood, if you're dealing with something else you need to cope with now, you may be able to find video games from time to time as a way to cope as well, and it can be very beneficial sometimes. Now, to conclude, after hearing my speech, I hope those of you who are here that were skeptical of the benefits of video games at first now can see their benefits and may even be willing to give them a try. Thank you.